Julian Eltinge was actually born just outside of Boston. And when he was a little kid, his mother got him into doing these sort of toddler shows where they would dress up boys as girls. Although boys at the time could often be dressed and styled like what we think of in a feminine way with like long
Yeah.
curly hair. It's kind of the Little Lord Fauntleroy era. His father hears the call of the West and sort of the frontier and this Teddy Roosevelt, go and extract riches from the land. And he drags the family all over the Americas. He never strikes it rich. He basically becomes more drunk and bitter, and he's kind of a failure as a man. But his son, Billy, starts to notice, like, I like theater. I like impersonating. I like actors, because you kind of meet those kind of people. And so Billy and Mother, I think they've sort of had it with Dad, and they come back to Boston around 1895, 96. He starts taking dance lessons because he's a good dancer. He's a good singer. He has that magical something, that like performers do. And he starts doing something called cakewalking, which was a kind of minstrelized Black American art form that kind of like taken by like white performers, a little like hip hop today. He eventually becomes this sort of like darling of Boston high society. He does these incredible impersonations of women. He can dance, he can sing, he's very polite. Plus, he's very like, hey, I just do that because I'm really good at it. But when I'm not in drag, I'm like boxing and smoking cigars and trading stocks. So they adopt him. And so he gets into these semi-professional musicals that are put on by the Boston Corps of Cadets, which is a military unit. But they really like their drag musicals. It was all guys. These are a lot of like famous, Boston families, high society. And he sort of wangles his way in. And he's like, well, I guess if nobody notices, I'll just sing a little. And Robert A. Barnett, who's in charge, is like, that kid's good. So he becomes a big star of these semi-amateur musicals that are very popular in Boston. But he gets into vaudeville and he starts impersonating women in this very precise, you can see, kind of illusionistic way.
How do we go from men loving drag shows to them being such a controversial topic? Like how did we get here? What happened in between?
Yeah. And in a way it's comforting because you can kind of see it happening again. There obviously are some differences. Masha Gessen, who's written a lot about authoritarianism, I would say that like the reaction is about, it very often takes the form of trying to conform or delineate gender dualities and binarities to go back to a past that never really existed. During World War I, there were some very popular drag musicals that were created and produced in the military, the Canadian military, the US military. They performed in like war-torn France. They were hugely popular. The men were, this is also at the same time that a lot of colleges are putting on these original musicals. And there are different kinds of male performers, and the sort of young, pretty ones are called broilers because they're like tender young chickens,
I mean, drag in general is incredibly old. Like it's very, very old. It definitely predates Julian, right? It, in ancient Greece, women weren't allowed to be on stage.
So, women generally don't appear on the Western stage, other than in like Commedia dell'arte troupes, these kind of mime troupes. And there are some women in France, but let's just talk about England and the US and North America. During Shakespeare's day, men played all the parts.
Yeah.
And they very famously played women parts illusionistically, like Lady Macbeth, Juliet. Those were written for men.
Yeah.
Boy players. Then the theater is banned altogether because, blah, blah, religious people are anxious, got to get rid of the theater. It comes back in 1660 after being banned for 18 years. There's some private theater, but what's really interesting is that actresses are now allowed to perform. And instead of being like, they're kind of getting their footing, they're superstars like all of a sudden. But there's still a lineage of some impersonation. So you have Edward Kynaston playing Lady Macbeth, and then you have Anne Bracegirdle playing Lady Macbeth. I don't know if that's but something like that. And there's a lot of debate amongst Londoners. Who's better? Who's got the better set of legs? Eventually the women win out because they become so popular. Like women become superstars. They start to have some actually autonomy. So the men start to become campier and campier. They become dame characters, and they sort of eventually end up, after a while, they end up really in the music hall, which is kind of like vaudeville, comedy, kind of dragging it up. And that's where it kind of goes. It sort of ends up being this kind of ghettoized subculture. And then it starts to reemerge. Real female impressionism starts to reemerge right around Julian's time and with his help. And so he's like atop the wave. And then it kind of explodes again for the next 30, 40 years. And then it starts to shut down again.
Wow. So
Yeah.
so what happened to Julian?
In the 30s, there's this real reaction against drag, against, anything perceived to be inversive or homosexual. And he's having health problems. He was never the most, vaudevillians are not known for being the most balanced humans. Then in LA, where he's living, they pass ordinances against drag, and he has to appear and before a judge and argue his case. He gets like a special dispensation because he's so famous. Like he's allowed to basically go back to what he was doing, but everybody else is really shut down. And interestingly, he also is somewhat, for lack of a better term, conservative or libertarian. Like he doesn't lean into the fight. He's like, taxes are too high and I'm just a normal guy. And he really doesn't want to be associated with any kind of out groups, literally or figuratively. And then at the end, in 1941, he goes back to New York to do a gig at Billy Rose's Diamond Horseshoe. And he does a set of shows for a few months. He succumbs in 1941, I think, to a combination of long-running health things. He ends, and it's very emblematic of like the end of that era, because now we begin the much more conservative, at least in a broader sense, 40s and 50s.
Absolutely.
Where like homosexuals and the drag artists are other.
Yeah. They're grouped together and then they're really driven into hiding places.
And persecuted.
Wow.
Yeah.
How come more people don't know his name? How did he become so obscure?
It's interesting. That's always a good question. My last book was about Eva Tangway, who was a huge star. They were both both famous and successful. They even had this sham engagement for a while. He hated marriage. He wasn't going to get married. But the idea was like she was going to wear the tuxedo and he was going to wear the dress. And it was really this great stunt. Eva Tangway was somebody who was really forgotten until I started doing a long time ago my dissertation research on vaudeville. And what I came to really appreciate is so many people are forgotten. It's actually rare that people are remembered. I think Julian, there are people in the sort of LGBTQ world and culture community over the years that have tried to resuscitate him as like this great forgotten drag artist. But then also like, he seemed a little ambivalent about identity, you know. I don't think that there's one answer. There are people who have always been interested in Julian Eltinge. And then there are many, many people who don't know who he is. And I think it's something of the vagaries of fate and history. And maybe people will read the book and at least appreciate his place in history, So
this is a really interesting story. I think how different it is from what we think of as drag now is what makes it so interesting. It really shows you how far we've come. Like you said, he wasn't really involved in the political side, the advocacy side, and now that is a huge part of the drag identity.
Exactly. And to even complicate matters further, I ask myself, which is more subversive? Somebody who unconsciously completely kind of fits into the accepted identity of a woman, which makes a kind of deal with conventional culture that loves him. And this is the deal we're going to make because we really like drag. It raises a certain kind of excitement that doesn't cross over into anxiety. And we're cool with this, right? You're cool. I'm cool with this. You're cool with this, And so in a way, he's very subversive.
I think that's what people like about drag is it entertains them, but they also, even if they don't realize they're doing it, they really are thinking about this stuff just a little bit more. And I know tons of, straight guys who watch drag race with their girlfriends and they love it.
I heard Sarah Marshall talk about this on her podcast, You're Wrong About, like, it's so hard for men to just spend time with other men.
Yeah.
Not feel freaked out about it.
Yeah.
And together, it's so clear that like the first corps of cadets that Julian Eltinge starts doing these drag musicals with, like they really want to get together. No girls allowed. They want to feel pretty. They want to feel special. They want to put on a show. And I remember, it's funny. I'm like, well, I thought I had no connection to it. Then I realized I went to an all boys, very sports oriented, competitive summer camp. And, there were a few of us who were into music and drama, and they had a little music and drama program, and we would do musicals. And it was like not even questioned. It was accepted. Yeah, boys are going to play the women's parts, sometimes campier,
Yeah.
sometimes very like beautifully and almost erotically. And it was like, of course, like that works.
Yeah.
So our signals and our what we respond to can be very fluid, I think.